was one of 4,000 public CEOs in the United States. There's 1,700 current NFL players on the active rosters. There's 400 current NBA players. It's so elite.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today we are joined by Chip Paucek, the co-founder and co-CEO of PAC, the pro athlete community, and the former CEO of 2U and a multi-time entrepreneur prior to that venture. So Chip, thank you so much for taking some time to chat today.
Thrilled to be here, Brent.
Well, it's kind of funny because you've already had your hands in this podcast several times. I've basically just brought people in via this PAC network that I've been adjacent to via work. I've had Jake Browning on the pod. I've had Kenyon Drake on the pod. I've had Marcus Colston on the pod.
Those are all PAC members, actually. PAC royalty.
That's right. I wanted to go straight to them. So we're going to break down all things PAC. But like I mentioned in the little intro there, you are a serious technology executive. You've been a public company CEO. You've built companies from the ground up. You're doing it again now with PAC. How did you stumble into this pro athlete community where all of a sudden you've got hundreds of current and recently retired athletes from the NFL, MLB, NBA? How did this happen?
So, I love the notion that if you're an entrepreneur and you wake up in the morning, and I'm an entrepreneur, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm going to start pro athlete community. Good luck. Who's going to join? So I can't take credit for the origination of pro athlete community. My co-founder, a guy named Caleb Thornhill, was a Michigan State linebacker and was very successful as a college player. Didn't make it to the NFL, but got into player development in the NFL and was working for first the Lions and then the Miami Dolphins, and began developing these things. Convinced the owner to invest a little bit of money in the guys in the off season. And they were building these programs called the Miami Dolphins Business Combine. It was like a week on, Wall Street, franchising, real estate, things that would be of interest to the players to really help the players develop their skill set off the field. And so, Caleb was doing this, and I had read about it, but I was running 2U at the time. I'd started a company called 2U many years ago and took it public, and I was running it. And so we love that the story of PAC actually starts because a player chose to do some networking. Well, how did that happen? So when we IPO'd 2U, my wife and I have been together a long time. And, she was like, look, we're not going to change our life in any meaningful way, except one thing. You're going to buy those crazy ass seats in the end zone at Hard Rock because you love football so much. And as you can see, I have my Dolphins stuff behind me. I love professional football. I love all professional sports, but particularly passionate about the Miami Dolphins at times, sadly for me. So the stadium had just been renovated. So we bought these seats that are on the field in the end zone. And the point of the story is not to talk about my bougie seats. I was sitting in the seats, and in the pre-warm-up period, a player would walk the field. Because what people don't realize is when gates open, the first half hour, 45 minutes or so, players don't have their uniform on. They have their sweats on, and they can do whatever they choose. They each have a personal warm-up. Some stay in the locker room, don't come out. Some walk around the field. So this player, lovely human named Jermon Bushrod, he's the best. He would walk the field, and he would stop and chop it up with me and just talk about life. After doing this 5 or 6 times, we really get to know each other. We end up going to dinner, and he ends up getting heavily involved in 2U. Now, we love that the story of PAC happens because a player chose to network. Why? Because one of the things we teach the players is networking in the program. Like, one conversation can change your life. You never know when it's going to happen. You just have to be open to it. And it's something you can actually learn to do. You can do this better. NFL players, NBA players, they think they're the only ones that are bad at networking. They don't realize everybody finds it stressful. So if you get good at it, it's really powerful. So Jermon Bushrod gets involved in 2U. And, we built really high quality online programs for universities all over the world. And, he calls me one day and he's like, Chip, there's this guy at the Dolphins doing these amazing things for players, and you could really help him. Would you consider meeting him? Now, I was super jacked about that. Brent, I was more excited to do that than to go to the White House. So like, for me, that's of course I'm all in. So I end up meeting Caleb, and the rest is history. It's really interesting that that all happened because a player chose to sort of step out of his comfort zone And so I meet Caleb. He invites me to do one of these Dolphins combines. So I take a week off work and we go do this together. And I bring in all my CEO peers and we build the program together. And we kind of hit it out of the park. And we also hit it off. Caleb, I'm 54, he's 40, so he's younger than me. I certainly never played professional sports. He came real close. Great Michigan State linebacker. But we're very similar in a lot of ways. We care about the same sort of things. So servant leadership, mentorship, those types of things. And so we hit it out of the park. And once we were done, I went back to my normal life thinking that this is it. And I was running 2U as a public company. I was a public company CEO for 10 years. He calls me a week later and he's like, Chip, I know this is crazy, but this is like a real problem across every professional sport. And I will never be able to change the narrative of former professional athletes unless I do this as a company. Would you consider, I know you run a big ass public company you started, but would you consider doing this as a company? And I got home and my wife, Gabby, was like, Chip, you got to do it. This is everything you care about wrapped into one. So I said, heck with it. Here we go. So we started it. 2.5 years later, it is really, really it's almost turning into a movement. We're at 620 guys. We're about to bring in another 75 to our next chapter U event in Nashville. By the end of the year, we'll be well above 1,000. There's really nothing quite like it. And very proud that we're having a deep impact on these guys' lives.
And so you mentioned that the business combine, that was kind of the early idea. And a lot of what you're doing is equipping these players who retire from these games so young with so much runway, so much left in the tank, try to educate and equip them to do a lot more with the 50 remaining working years they have.
Yeah.
So I guess and you said your partner was saying there's such a real need for this.
It's what the thing, Brent, is what people don't realize. People don't realize how difficult what they actually did is and how the circumstances around it are painful. And what I mean by that is it's not the physical pain of the sport. That's a fact. That's also real. But while they're playing professional sports, the world keeps scorn on them if they do anything but that thing. So if they're seen doing anything but football, they're considered not serious. If they're seen by their team to do something that isn't football, their head isn't in the game. They might get cut. And then they're cut. And even the most famous players, Jason and Devin McCourty are our two board chairs, very, very successful NFL players. And they tell the story of getting handed the black trash bag when they got cut, and then they go from 80,000 people screaming their name coming out of the tunnel during a period where they were told they shouldn't do anything else but football to the lights being off. And many of them go through a really tough time, really bad place. An unfortunate amount of suicide occurs in these former professional athletes. So it's very serious. People hear about PAC and they think, 30 for 30 broke. You're helping these guys not spend their money. They all blow their money. No, that's not true. There's a small amount of that. These are elite people who have had very difficult circumstances. And the skill set they have is so strong. And it's not their athletic ability. Like, that's table stakes. It's grit, rigor, intelligence, drive, resilience. Like, everything that you and I, when we hire, we're trying to hire for, they immediately have, because by definition, there were 4,000. I was one of 4,000 public CEOs in the United States. There's 1,700 current NFL players on the active rosters. Like, there's 400 current NBA players.
So elite.
It's so elite. Our job is to give them exposure to new opportunities. It's not my job to tell them what they should burn for, but it is my job to help them figure out what they could burn for. And you nailed it on the head. They're young. So there's a lot ahead. The fact that the world would say you're retired at 32, it's offensive.
Right.
That's not real.
And that's in the event that you had a long career. A lot of times it's like 25, 26, 27.
Yep. Unfortunately, average life of NFL player, 3.3 years. So it's short.
It's short. And something that I'd love to get your perspective on. So there's kind of I know that there's a spectrum within PAC. There are some guys who were Pro Bowlers, played for 15 years, and they've got over $100 million in the bank. There are other guys who are like, I played for 3 years. I made a little bit of money. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. I'm 25. But in either case, can you give me an example of maybe what it's like for someone in between, where I bet it's way less. I bet it's not uncommon that you have a guy who's 29 years old. He's got 20 million in the bank. You'd think this guy has it so made, and yet combining what you touched on, that loss of identity and just the like almost deer in headlights of this world outside of football, what does that person, what are those maybe the 18 months post retirement for someone like that? What does it tend to look like? I would assume you're kind of a wandering nomad trying to figure out
Yeah.
what comes next.
Well, I mean, just to make it personal, when I left 2U after, I was a public CEO for a decade, and not to play the violin for myself, but it's a tough run when you're doing it. And you are a public figure in a certain way. And you have, I had the Twitter scorn of, people posting pictures of my wife on Twitter and all this kind of, drawing on pictures of me and posting them on Reddit. And, because you're a public CEO, so all this ridiculous stuff you have to deal with. But I didn't have the celebrity. I didn't have the scorn that they have for doing anything but their sport. And I certainly didn't have 80,000 people screaming my name coming out of the tunnel. But to make it personal, when I left 2U, very, very close friend of mine, who is now running an incredible public company that he built called Zeta Global. His name's David Steinberg. He's the best. He said to me, he's like, he had had a similar experience leaving his public company. And he's like, what's going to happen, you're going to be standing in line at Starbucks and you're going to be super jacked just to be another guy standing in line at Starbucks because the pressure's gone. Because by the time you get to the counter, you're kind of be crapping yourself that you're just another guy standing in line at Starbucks. And he's very right. Like this archetype of what, that you were running this big company and it was very public, and the relief of pressure was real, but your identity's caught up in it. And I lived it a little bit. Now, I lived it to a fraction of what professional athletes live because it's just so high profile.
Right.
So, and also they have not had the ability to explore all of the various things that somebody that is in their 20s would typically explore. I mean, how many people in their 30s are doing what they thought they'd be doing when they were in their early 20s? Very few. Like, careers change very quickly today. So our job is to give them that exposure. One of our lines is exposure breeds expansion. We really believe it. Like, exposure to interesting things. And what's happening across the community is once the light goes on for these guys in a particular place where they find energy, I mean, watch out. They are unbelievable. They will put in the time. They will put in the reps. We talk about that a lot. Like they'll put in the reps. It's hard to put in the reps on something. So we just came from, right before this podcast was recorded, we did a player call for a bunch of players that are considering signing up for the Nashville event, which is at the end of the month. And I had 4 PAC members that have been to PAC and loved it. And, just to hear like Whitney Merciless, Sam Barrington, Jamar Taylor, and Devon Kennard, they were all very successful players. But more importantly, now to hear what they're doing off the field post PAC is incredibly rewarding. That's really what it's all about. So we'd like to say 3 things. Invest in yourself, cultivate meaningful relationships. And if you do that, you will elevate your life and those around you. And I really believe it, and I think it's applicable to any particular trade. But when you do it within the world of professional athletes, the world gets pretty exciting.
And so go a little bit deeper on a business combine and the actual events that you've put on. I had the privilege of stopping by one in Austin like 9 months ago now, and it was incredible. I saw a big keynote where you had another public company CEO speaking on stage. These guys all had their pen and paper out, taking rigorous notes like a classic athlete in a film room. And then they did their breakouts to all these different opportunities to give them that exposure. Talk a little bit about that.
So the combines are a combination of a lot of personal development because we really believe you have to get the heart right first. So there's like things like core values work where you're really identifying what matters to you, how you want to represent, how you want to show up to the world. Really powerful personal stuff. Personal coaching is part of that. So the players are in an even smaller cohort with a personal coach. So in our recent Miami Next Chapter U, these are all getting a lot bigger. So we had 19 personal coaches on staff working with the teams of players. Some of it is skill building, time blocking and tackling, networking, negotiation. Those are all seminars that we do during the week. They're very fun. So the negotiation seminar is my favorite. It's pretty wild. We have this expert who's awesome. His name's Kurt Richardson, and he gives a really good, detailed, but practical explanation of how to network. And then all of a sudden, the guys don't expect this. He literally puts his phone number up on the screen and he separates them into small groups of 5 and he makes them leave and go out for an hour into the wild and have people that are business execs call that number with a piece of business advice. And the winning team, we give them an award. And it gets super competitive. And at first, it's very intimidating. I mean, you have 5 NFL players walking out into the wild to go talk to people. Really hard to do. Like, it might be the most uncomfortable networking you could make them do. But we make them do it. And the winning team this last time had 38 calls. So what's great about that is then later that evening, the combine ends with a networking reception. And I really do work hard to bring in an elite crew of CEOs, and it's a safe space. You know, unfortunately, pro athletes have a lot of people trying to prey on them all the time. There's a lot of people that want to get in their pockets. So, you know, we at PAC, you know, we firmly believe that one of the reasons why it's working is trust. Like, they trust us to manicure the community. They trust us to make sure that we don't have people coming that are pitching them all the time. So the networking reception is filled, honestly, with people like you that have done interesting things off the field that really want to pour back into the guys. And it's a safe space and it's fun. Now, you know, a couple hours in, it turns into a great party. But at the beginning, you know, the first 2 hours, it's really everybody meeting everybody. You know, so it's some form of community skill building. There's a lot of, we take them on deep dives where they can specialize in a particular area. So we survey the guys. So, you know, like the deep dives for Nashville range from, you know, building a gym to venture capital to entrepreneurship, startups, you know, that kind of thing. Entrepreneurship through acquisitions. So a lot of these guys might end, you know, buying a trucking company or buying a local business of some kind and building that up. And maybe they want to do that. And maybe they want to roll up companies. You know, you've heard a lot of athletes, like if an athlete gets into franchising, they do have a leg up on the world because they're a professional athlete. So, they're incredible. I mean, I've learned more about real estate from PAC than I ever had in my life. It's not my world. I'm a startup guy.
Right.
And, you know, I'm going to these PACs and I'm like, I get home to Gabby and I'm like, why the hell are we doing this? You know? So I've started to diversify my own portfolio more actively because of PAC. You know, you should never stop learning.
It's kind of amazing because, like you mentioned on the networking activity exercise, these guys, people look at them like superheroes on TV. And you would think, how in the world could this guy, who I've been screaming his name for the last 10 years, how could he say when he gets off the field, I don't feel like I know how to network? It's because they haven't had the exposure to that type of thing. They've been laser focused on their craft, which was professional football or basketball or baseball. But I would imagine that you've witnessed people who are incredibly quick on the uptake when it comes to that because of all the soft skills and intangibles that they've had built into them through their sports.
You know, it's funny too, because one of the things is there's no question that resilience is a huge part of their makeup. But, you know, one of the things that people underestimate is actually the intelligence you have to do this well. And so one of the things that they've done to me in the past is some of the experts have put me on stage and had me diagnose plays. And it's really hard. And it's funny and I feel like I know football, and it's funny because they're all laughing about it. They love it. But the reality is, like, the skill set required to do these things is exceptional. They are by definition exceptional. That exposure to the new thing does tend to light the fire, and then watch out. So we've got a bunch of guys, like, I know you had Jake Browning on your podcast. Jake started a company coming out of PAC and really doing well, doing a bunch of real estate. Jake, like, is a good example of a guy who fully embraced all the various components of PAC. So the C is probably the most important part of PAC, though. Pro athlete community. That, you know, it's a long-term locker room that'll never hand you a black trash bag. And it's filled with 2 types of people: like-minded men and eventually women. We're not there yet, but we're getting close. Who played pro sports that are investing in themselves. That last part's real important. These are people that are choosing to invest in themselves. And then people like you and me that have done interesting things off the field that'll pour in for the right reasons. And you put the 2 together and it gets pretty wild.
So you hit on it. You said, you know, expanding into women's sports is on the roadmap in the future. it sounds like, or my understanding is there's been a pretty big foothold in the NFL, not shocking given your initial partners and the people actually running this business alongside you. How does this grow? Where are the most direct paths? And it's, what's the requirement, I guess, from league buy-in to player buy-in? Break that down a little bit.
It's most importantly player buy-in, without question. That is, we are player first. I'm excited to tell you that we're now working across 9 different pro sports. We have our first 2 pro golfers. We have one MMA fighter. So it's early days in some of these leagues, and what's been wonderful is, in the beginning we weren't 100% sure if we would have to do all of these separate. And no, the pro athletes love being around the other pro athletes. So the golfers love being around the football players, who love being around the basketball players, and so on and so forth. And the MMA fighter might have been the most popular guy in the entire room. And he's fascinating. He's a really fascinating guy. He just won a big fight. So he had a really big moment. It was cool to see, because while he's in this fight, the entire PAC community was watching. It was really neat. So we do think this is global. This is not a U.S. problem. This is a global problem. And obviously, football in the rest of the world is the biggest sport in the world. Soccer here in the States, football everywhere else is huge. And this is a real problem in that sport as well. And there are many leagues across various parts of the world that could use this. And we think rugby, we think swimming, we think the Olympics. We had our first Olympic athlete who signed up. His name's Ryan Murphy, won 5 golds in swimming. So he just signed up. So, we're excited to expand across the pro sports universe. That's part of what we're excited about, so it's going to be, at 54, I guess what I would tell you is, I don't know if you ever heard of this thing called ikigai, but, big believer in it. Japanese term, sort of there's a Venn diagram. There are 4 circles. And if you find the intersection of those 4 circles, it's like your reason for being. And the 4 circles are what the world needs, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what you love. And, at 54, I found my ikigai, and it's pretty sweet.
That is awesome.
So, and if you can find it, treasure it.
So that's proathletecommunity.com to learn a bit more. Final thing, what would be your distilled call to action for a current or former professional athlete to get them, to bring them into the fold here?
We would love to bring you to Pro Athlete Community. So you can find us either on the internet at proathletecommunity.com or on Instagram, Pro Athlete Community. We're easy to find. We would love to have you. This is an opportunity to invest in yourself. And as I said, when you cultivate meaningful relationships like we're able to bring to bear, you will elevate your life and those around you. So I highly encourage you to reach out. I would love to meet you in person and get you to a Pro Athlete Community Business Combine.
All right. I love it. Chip, thank you so much. So cool to learn about what you're building. Thanks again.
See you, man.